This Sunday, we hear one of my favorite Easter stories, the story of those two disciples on the road to Emmaus, who discovered in a stranger someone they never expected. But right there at the beginning, there's an interesting line, one that always catches my attention. They stood still, looking sad. I can't help but imagine Cleopas and that unnamed companion suddenly getting all choked up when asked about their conversation along the way. I've seen those moments occur lately, often in TV interviews with healthcare workers or people who've lost their jobs or artists performing online. They don't always look sad, but they all seem to stand still for a moment, overcome by the intensity of whatever they're feeling or describing or experiencing. Perhaps we've all had times like that, just lately or at other moments in life. Times when we pull up and almost freeze for a moment, whether in grief or in joy or in memory. And we need to take a second to collect ourselves. In the case of these two disciples, I can't help but think that they were overcome for a moment by absence. Jesus' absence, their own absence from their friends, an absence intensified by their disappointment and shock about what had happened over a few short days, how things had changed completely from what they expected. I doubt that it's hard for many of us to empathize with that experience of absence, intensified lately in our case, perhaps by the governor's announcement that our time apart should extend for another full month. Another month of absence from friends at school or on the sports field, from distant children and grandchildren, from friends, from parents living in communal settings, from church. That's a lot of absence. And yet, in our story, absence becomes presence. First hidden, then startling. In the disciples' case, a stranger turns out to be a friend in disguise, one who asks questions, who provides his own answers, along with new insight. Presence, slowly unfolding, and then unveiled, and then absent again. Welcome to Easter, then and now. It begins with an absence, even a destructive loss, and then something new. A presence that slowly begins to reveal itself in new insights, in conversation, and then startles in unexpected strangers, in an everyday meal on the road. All of it is a presence that would not have been possible if not for the absence that began it. The loss of Jesus made possible a different kind of presence, one not limited to one person or place, or even to Jesus himself, but one discovered all over the place, in all kinds of people. Would any of that have been possible if not for the absence left by Jesus' death? I, for one, don't think so, even if I wish it were so. For some reason, it often seems to take a loss, a disruption, something that pulls us up in our tracks to make way for whatever new thing God might be doing. When we have always done it that way, it can be hard to do it any other way unless the way we've always done it isn't possible anymore. In the case of Jesus' death and resurrection, it meant an expansion of his good news beyond Galilee and Judea. His absence transformed understanding of what it meant to be chosen by God, one not limited to one people or tribe. His loss meant a shift from understanding one place as uniquely holy to any place being equally so. It meant the revolutionary idea that any person can be inspired by the Spirit of God. You don't have to be born into a priestly caste or set aside as a prophet. In the moment, of course, it's not always so clear-cut why the absence or what presence might appear in its place. It took what seemed to be a stranger to help those disciples explore their tradition, to see how Jesus' story might fit into the pattern of Israel's story. Our own Christian scriptures reflect more than 100 years of trying to make sense of it all, and they only began a tradition that we are continuing now, of looking for the new things God might be doing in us as a people, individually, to bring new presence out of lonely absence. That cycle of absence and presence, death and resurrection, seems to be the pattern of how God comes into the world in new ways. And sometimes those ways are more jarring than others. St. Simon's own recent life together has been marked by those kinds of jarring losses and absences, followed by waiting on the way, and I hope, the slow unfolding of God's new work within us in this interim time, perhaps getting us ready for a startling new presence. Our common life as a society, even as a broad global community, is also undergoing so many absences, so many losses. What new presence of God is now unfolding? What is God revealing among us? And how would we know that it is the one for whom our hearts are burning? Only time will tell, then as now. And yet in this story today are the clues to where we might find the risen one. In discussing together as we walk along, in listening to new voices and welcoming strangers, in blessing bread around a common table, in sharing what we are seeing and hearing. Where are you seeing the presence unfold in this time? Has it been slowly appearing, or has it been a sudden surprise? I'll not pretend that it's easy to wait. And yet, it seems to be the way Christ appears among those of us who walk this road and look with Easter eyes. That pattern of death and resurrection, of loss and recovery, of absence and presence. And because we've walked this road before, we will soon discover again, in this time of absence, that startling presence who has been walking with us all along.